The wind of early fall whispered through the trees outside the grand house as Samantha Mitchell made her way up the stone driveway. Her heart beat a little faster than usual, not from excitement but from a gnawing anxiety she couldn't shake. She hadn't been back here in 5 years. The familiar path to her mother's house, the one she had walked countless times during her childhood, now felt strange and distant. Her husband, Kyle, had urged her to go. "You need to go, Sam. Whatever's going on, it's better you know than wonder forever." She had hesitated. It wasn't just about the house, it was everything it represented, the family ties, the memories, and the cracks she'd tried to ignore. But something told her that today would change everything. Samantha had just lost her father, Henry, only 3 months ago, and it was still hard to fathom the man who had been her rock was gone. She hadn't spoken to her mother, Nancy, in nearly a year, not since their last argument. But now, her mother was asking her to come back for the reading of the will. Samantha could feel the weight of it in her chest as she stood at the door, preparing herself for whatever lay inside. When Nancy opened the door, she was not the woman Samantha remembered. Her face was drawn and pale, her eyes distant as she gazed at her daughter. "Come in," she said, her voice tight, like she was trying to hold back emotions that threatened to spill over. Samantha stepped inside, her mind racing as she wondered what had prompted the sudden invitation. Something was wrong, that much was clear. They sat in the living room, and soon, the lawyer arrived. Richard was a family friend, someone Samantha had known since childhood. But today, his usually calm demeanor was replaced with something more serious, even grim. He handed a sealed envelope to Nancy, who opened it slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Without saying a word, she passed it to Samantha. Samantha glanced down at the paper, the words on the will jumping out at her like daggers. "I, Henry Mitchell, leave all my estate, assets, and belongings to my beloved wife, Nancy Mitchell, and my stepson, Daniel Turner. Samantha Mitchell is not entitled to any portion of my estate." The words were like a slap in the face. Samantha's heart sank. She read the line again, then again, as if her mind couldn't comprehend what her father had written. Not entitled? She had always been his daughter, had spent years growing up under the roof of this very house, bonding with her father, sharing holidays, birthdays, and life's milestones. How could he leave her nothing? Nancy sat back in her chair, silent, her eyes avoiding her daughter's gaze. Richard cleared his throat awkwardly. "This is as per Mr. Mitchell's wishes," he said quietly, not looking up from the table. Samantha felt a cold rush of anger flood through her. "This doesn't make sense," she whispered, struggling to maintain control. "Dad would never," but her voice broke, and she couldn't finish the sentence. She couldn't fathom why her father, a man she had thought she knew so well, would do this to her. Richard, sensing the tension in the room, stood and excused himself, leaving Samantha and Nancy alone. The silence that followed was suffocating. Samantha could barely breathe as she stared at the will. All these years of love and support, all the sacrifices her father had made for her, it was as if they had meant nothing. She couldn't help but ask the question, even though she feared the answer. "Mom. Why?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "Why did he leave everything to Daniel? Why not me? I'm his daughter." Nancy didn't immediately respond. Instead, she stared at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. Finally, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "Sam. You've never known the truth. Your father wasn't always honest with you. Daniel, he's your brother, your full brother. Not by blood, but by heart. Your father and I," Nancy hesitated. "We were married when I was already pregnant with Daniel." Samantha's heart skipped a beat. She felt a rush of disbelief. "Wait, you're telling me I'm not his daughter? Not his real daughter?" The words stung, but they made sense in the worst possible way. She had always wondered why there were so many secrets in her family, but she never expected this. Her mind raced, trying to piece it all together. Her father had never told her the truth about her family. Not about Daniel, not about her own place in it. And now, he had written her out of everything. She could hardly believe it, but the reality was staring her in the face. Nancy looked up at her, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Your father, he never wanted to tell you. He was ashamed, I think. But Daniel was always his son. He loved you both, but in his heart, Daniel was the one he truly wanted to leave everything to. I didn't agree with it, but I couldn't change his mind." Samantha stood, her chair scraping across the wooden floor, her mind in a whirlwind. Her father had left her nothing, but worse, he had denied her entire identity. She wasn't even his biological child. Everything she had known, everything she thought she was, had been a lie. "I need to leave," Samantha said, her voice tight, struggling to keep the tears at bay. "I can't stay here." Before Nancy could respond, Samantha turned and walked out the door, her feet heavy on the ground. As she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, the weight of the moment settled on her. She had to find a way to make things right, to understand why her father had done this, and perhaps, just perhaps, find out who she really was. But for now, one thing was certain: the battle for what was hers had only just begun. Samantha sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel with a white-knuckled intensity. The crisp autumn air was still, and the streets of her childhood neighborhood passed by in a blur. Her mind was a whirlwind, each thought crashing into the next like waves on a stormy sea. She had just left her mother's house, and every moment since that reading of her father's will felt like it was unraveling her entire life. The silence of the car was suffocating. She could still feel the weight of her father's words, the betrayal sinking deep into her bones. She wasn't his daughter, not by blood, not in his eyes. Daniel, her half-brother, had everything. Samantha had always been close to her father, or at least she had thought she was. He had always made her feel loved and supported. But now it seemed like that had all been a lie. She needed answers. She needed to understand why, and more than that, she needed to confront the person who had always been her rock, the man who had shaped her world, and demand the truth. But how could she confront him now that he was gone? Was it even possible to find closure when everything she knew had been built on a lie? Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, breaking her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw Kyle's name. Her heart fluttered, the familiar comfort of his presence a welcome distraction. She answered the call quickly, her voice trembling slightly as she spoke. "Hey, babe." "Kyle," she started, her words tumbling out in a rush, "I don't know what to do. I just left Mom's. The will. The will said I'm not even his daughter. He left everything to Daniel. I can't even think straight right now." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Kyle was always good at staying calm, at providing her with the space she needed to think things through. But this time, Samantha could hear the worry in his voice. "I'm sorry, Sam. I know that must feel like a punch to the gut. But listen to me, okay? You don't have to figure this out all at once. You need to take some time to breathe, and we'll figure this out together." Samantha bit her lip, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. She hadn't cried yet, not truly. But the truth was, she was lost. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, and there was nothing beneath her feet but empty space. I need to know why," she whispered. "Why did he do this to me? How could he leave me with nothing after everything? It doesn't make sense, Kyle." "I know, baby," Kyle said softly, his voice full of sympathy. "But right now, you have to focus on what you can control. This is a shock, and it's painful. But you need to give yourself the time to process it all. We'll find out what's really going on. You're not alone in this." Samantha felt the tears well up in her eyes. "I just want my father back. I want to understand why he kept all of this from me." She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to steady herself, the weight of the conversation pressing on her chest. "I don't even know who I am anymore." There was a long pause. She could hear Kyle's steady breathing on the other end of the line. Then, with quiet resolve, he spoke again. "You're Samantha Mitchell. You're the woman I love. You're not defined by that will or what your father left behind. We'll figure out the truth, and when we do, we'll face it together. Okay?" His words, simple but full of unwavering support, made her heart ache in the best way possible. Kyle had always been there for her. He was the constant in her life, the person who had stood by her through thick and thin. But now, even his calm demeanor couldn't calm the storm swirling inside her. "Okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "But right now, I don't even know where to start." "You start by taking care of yourself," Kyle urged. "Maybe you should come home. Get some rest, clear your head. Then, when you're ready, we can go together and get the answers you need." Samantha hesitated for a moment. She knew Kyle was right. She needed a break. The drive back to her house would give her time to think, to gather her strength. But even as she contemplated going home, she knew deep down that this wouldn't be over. The truth about her father, about Daniel, and about everything that had been hidden for so long, it would come to light, and she would face it head on. She had to. "I'll be home soon," she said finally, her voice stronger than before. "Thanks, Kyle. I don't know what I'd do without you." You don't ever have to do it alone, Sam. I'm here for you. After the call ended, Samantha drove in silence. The streets of the city she had once called home felt unfamiliar now, the buildings towering over her like strangers. She could barely recognize the woman staring back at her from the rearview mirror. Who was she now, after everything? Her thoughts turned to Daniel. He had been a constant presence in her life, though they were never as close as she'd hoped. Their relationship had always been strained, and she had never fully understood why. But now, with the revelation of the will, things seemed clearer. Daniel had always been the one to inherit. Her father's devotion to him was undeniable, even if it wasn't in the way Samantha had hoped for. But why had her father chosen to cut her out? Why not just be honest with her, instead of building a life around secrets? Samantha shook her head, trying to clear her thoughts. It wasn't just the will. It was everything that had happened in the last few years, the distance between her and her mother, the confusion about her father's love, the fear that perhaps she had never truly known him. And now, Daniel was the one left with everything. But no matter how much she tried to fight it, Samantha knew one thing for sure: she wouldn't give up. She would find the truth, no matter how painful it might be. She owed it to herself. She owed it to the daughter she had once been. The next morning, Samantha woke up feeling the weight of yesterday's events still pressing down on her. The air in the room felt heavy, as though it too had absorbed the shock of the will reading. She sat up in bed, the sun filtering through the curtains, casting warm golden light on the walls. It was a new day, but it didn't feel new. It felt like she was trapped in a story that didn't belong to her. Her phone buzzed beside her on the nightstand, and she reached for it, already knowing who it was. Kyle had texted her a simple message: "You okay? Let me know if you need anything." She sighed, leaning back against the pillows, her mind still tangled in 1,000 questions. She couldn't shake the image of her mother's face from the night before, when the will had been read aloud. It was a mixture of guilt and shock, like she knew something Samantha didn't, but wasn't ready to say. But what was that something? What had been hidden from her for all these years? Samantha glanced at the clock. She had work later that day, but the idea of sitting in an office, pretending everything was fine, felt like an impossibility. The pressure to act normal was suffocating. She needed answers, and she needed them now. After a moment's hesitation, she stood up and grabbed her jacket from the chair. She sent Kyle a quick reply: "I'm heading to Daniel's place. I need to talk to him. I'll be okay." It wasn't the best decision, but it was the one that felt right. If she could confront Daniel, maybe she could finally understand the truth. The air outside was crisp and cool as she made her way to her car. The drive felt longer than usual, the weight of the unknown heavy on her chest. As she pulled up to Daniel's apartment building, she took a deep breath. It had been years since they'd really talked. They had exchanged polite greetings at family gatherings, but there had never been any real connection. Not like the connection Samantha had shared with their father. She didn't know what she was expecting, but she hoped for something, anything, that might help her make sense of the chaos in her mind. She rang the buzzer for Daniel's apartment, her finger trembling slightly as she pressed the button. It took a few moments, but then she heard the sound of locks being undone, followed by the door swinging open. "Samantha?" Daniel's voice was guarded, almost surprised, as if he hadn't expected her to show up at his door unannounced. He stepped back, giving her room to enter. "I need to talk to you," Samantha said, her voice steady, though her insides were anything but. "About Dad. About the will. I need to understand." Daniel's expression shifted, a flicker of something unreadable crossing his face before he stepped aside. "I figured you'd be coming by. Come in." The apartment was minimalist, almost sterile in its lack of warmth. The walls were bare, save for a few generic paintings, and the furniture was sleek but impersonal. Samantha couldn't help but feel a sharp pang of disappointment. It wasn't that she had expected Daniel to live in some grand, opulent place, but something about the coldness of the space seemed to reflect the distance between them. Daniel led her to the living room, where he motioned for her to sit on the couch. Samantha hesitated, then took a seat, folding her hands in her lap. She could feel the tension building in her chest, the urge to demand answers growing stronger by the second. But she knew she needed to stay calm if she was going to get the truth. "I didn't know how to tell you," Daniel started, his voice soft. "And I honestly didn't know if you'd even care. But Dad. He was always secretive. You know that." Samantha clenched her jaw, unwilling to let the bitterness in her voice show. "I know that. But this? This is something else. He cut me out of everything, Daniel. The will. He didn't leave me a thing. I know, he said, his tone sympathetic but distant. I tried to tell him it wasn't right. But he was set in his ways. He always thought you had everything you needed. And I guess he thought I needed more. Samantha's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of hurt and confusion clouding her thoughts. He thought you needed more? She repeated incredulously. That's what this is about? You getting more because you don't have enough? Daniel looked down at the floor, avoiding her gaze. I didn't want it to be like this. I didn't want the inheritance, Sam. I didn't ask for it. But he made me promise that I would take care of Mom, and that's why it's all in my name now. The house, the business, everything. He didn't trust you with it. Samantha shook her head, her mind racing. So, he gave you everything and nothing to me because he didn't trust me? Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time in hours, tears started to well up in her eyes. No, Daniel said quickly, sitting down across from her. It wasn't like that. It wasn't that he didn't trust you, Sam. He didn't know how to tell you the truth about who you really were. The words hung in the air, a heavy silence following them. Samantha's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, who I really was? Daniel shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I didn't want to be the one to tell you this. But you have a right to know. Sam. You're not Dad's biological daughter. Samantha's world tilted on its axis. She stared at him, her mind struggling to process the words. What? What are you talking about? She whispered. Daniel exhaled deeply, his face etched with regret. Dad found out when you were young. He had a paternity test done. You're my half-sister, Sam. He always loved you, always treated you as his own. But the truth was, you weren't his child by blood. The words hit her like a punch to the gut, and for a moment, everything went black. Her mind was flooded with disbelief. She had never even considered such a thing. She wasn't just cut out of the will, she was a stranger in her own family. Samantha felt the floor beneath her feet slip away. Samantha sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the couch so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The words Daniel had just spoken echoed in her head like a relentless drumbeat. You're my half-sister. You're not Dad's biological daughter. Her mind raced, struggling to catch up with the reality of what he had just revealed. She had always known there were secrets in her family, but she never imagined that this bombshell, would be the one to shatter everything she thought she knew about herself, about her life, and about the people closest to her. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin around her, the walls closing in, the air thick with suffocating tension. Daniel's face was a mask of guilt, his eyes filled with regret, but the damage was done. Her father, the man who had raised her, loved her, given her everything, he wasn't her biological father. It was as if the foundation of her entire existence had been ripped out from under her. I didn't want you to find out this way, Daniel continued, his voice low, careful. I wanted to protect you from it. But Dad thought you deserved to know, even if it hurt. And I never thought it would go like this, Sam. I didn't want to be the one to tell you. Samantha's head swam. She wanted to scream, to shout, to throw something, but all she could do was sit there, numb. Everything she had believed about her place in the world, the family, the love, the connection she'd felt, was now in question. It was as if someone had pulled back the curtain, exposing a harsh, painful truth she hadn't been prepared to face. But why didn't he tell me? Samantha finally managed to croak, her voice barely a whisper. Why did he keep it from me for so long? And why didn't you? Daniel rubbed his temples, looking down at the floor, clearly struggling with his own emotions. Dad was a man of pride, Sam. He didn't want to admit that he had made a mistake. He loved you, he really did, but he didn't want you to feel different, like you weren't really a part of this family. And me. He paused, looking up at her with a sorrowful expression. I didn't tell you because I didn't want to hurt you. I thought it was better if you never knew. I thought if I kept it quiet, everything would be okay. But now, I see how wrong that was. Samantha stood up abruptly, pacing back and forth in the small, sterile apartment. Her thoughts were a whirlwind. The anger was starting to bubble up inside her, sharp and hot. She wanted to lash out, but at whom? At Daniel? At her father? At herself? Do you have any idea what this does to me? She snapped, turning to face him. Her voice was shaking now, a mix of hurt and rage. I've spent my whole life believing that my father was my father, that he loved me, that I belonged. And now you're telling me I don't even belong here. That I'm just some stranger. Daniel's face tightened. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what Dad meant. He loved you. He raised you as his own. That's the truth. Blood doesn't matter, Sam. Family is about love, not biology. She scoffed, her eyes flashing with fury. Love? Don't give me that. I spent all these years believing in something, in someone, who wasn't even real. He wasn't my father, Daniel. I'm just a mistake to him. That's what you're telling me, right? Daniel stood up, his hands raised in a gesture of defense. No, that's not what I meant. You were never a mistake to him. He loved you, Sam. He raised you. And if you think it changes anything, then you're wrong. You were his daughter in every way that mattered. Samantha's breath hitched. She wanted to believe him, but the pieces of her life felt like they no longer fit together. What was real anymore? What was the point of all the love and memories she'd shared with her father if they weren't built on truth? She stopped pacing and turned back to face him, her voice soft now, almost lost. I need to know what happened. Why didn't he tell me? Why didn't I get a choice in this? He died, and he left me with nothing. Nothing except a piece of paper in a family that isn't even mine. How am I supposed to process that? Daniel looked down, unable to meet her gaze. Dad didn't want to hurt you. He didn't want you to feel abandoned or like you didn't belong. He was doing what he thought was best. But I get it, Sam. I get that it's not fair. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry for everything. Samantha's heart was heavy with the weight of it all. Her father's love now felt tainted, as if the foundation had cracked, leaving only fragments behind. She had always been proud of who she was, proud of her family. But now, she felt like an imposter, a shadow of the person she used to be. What now? Samantha asked, her voice small, the anger drained from her. What am I supposed to do with this? How am I supposed to move on from here? Daniel took a step closer, his voice quieter, more sincere. I don't know, Sam. But I'm here for you. I'll help you through this. I'll do whatever I can to make it right. But Samantha wasn't sure anything could make it right. The world she had built around her was crumbling, piece by piece. Her family, her identity, everything she thought she knew about herself, none of it felt real anymore. She was left with nothing but questions and a profound sense of loss. I need time, Samantha whispered. I need time to figure this out. I don't know what I need, but I can't keep doing this right now. Daniel nodded, his face filled with sympathy. Take all the time you need. I understand. Samantha walked to the door, her hand on the handle. She paused before stepping out, glancing back at Daniel one last time. I don't know what happens next, but I'm not the same person I was before. And I don't know if I can ever be. With that, she left the apartment, the door closing behind her with a finality that felt like the end of an era. The world outside seemed quieter, the air colder. Samantha's heart was heavy, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and hurt. She had always believed she was a daughter, a loved child in a family that accepted her. But now, she felt like a stranger, disconnected from everything she once knew. The days following Samantha's departure from Daniel's apartment felt like a blur. Time moved slowly, but at the same time, it felt like it was slipping away from her. She found herself standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down at a world that once felt familiar and safe but now seemed foreign and full of uncertainty. Her father was gone, and the truth about her origins was far more complicated than she could have ever imagined. She spent the first few days in a daze, unable to process the whirlwind of emotions that had taken over her life. She stayed holed up in her apartment, not answering calls, not seeing friends, barely eating. The pain was deep, a constant ache in her chest that seemed to intensify with every passing hour. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was floating in a sea of betrayal, betrayed by her father, by Daniel, and even by herself for not seeing the cracks earlier. But after days of wallowing in self-pity, Samantha knew she had to make a decision. She could either let this truth consume her, or she could find a way to reclaim her life. She didn't want to be defined by this revelation, even if it changed everything she thought she knew about herself. She had to figure out who she was without the safety net of her father's love, without the security of a family that had been built on lies. She finally reached out to Daniel. It wasn't easy. The pain was still raw, and she wasn't sure what she wanted from him. But she needed to talk. She needed to understand why things had gone so terribly wrong. He was the only link she had to her father now, the only person who could help her make sense of everything. When they met at a quiet cafe, the tension between them was palpable. Daniel looked older, more worn, his eyes filled with concern. But Samantha wasn't sure what she expected from him anymore. Words, apologies, none of it would change the fact that her world had been turned upside down. "Samantha," Daniel started, his voice hesitant. "I know there's nothing I can say to fix this. I can't undo what's been done, and I don't expect you to forgive me. But I want to be here for you. I want to help you through this, however I can." Samantha looked at him, searching his face for any hint of sincerity. She had spent so many years believing in the family they had, believing in a lie, and now, she was trying to find the truth in all the rubble. "You don't get it, Daniel," she replied softly. "It's not about forgiveness. It's about trust. You lied to me. You all lied to me. And I don't know how to move on from that." "I know," Daniel whispered. "And I don't know how to make it right. But I want to try. For you, for Dad's memory. For everything." Samantha took a deep breath, the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. She had thought that the truth would set her free, but it had only left her more tangled in confusion. Could she really forgive him? Could she ever look at her father's memory the same way again? But somewhere deep inside, Samantha knew she had to try. She had to heal, not for them, but for herself. She couldn't keep running from the truth, no matter how painful it was. She had to find a way to rebuild herself, to piece together the woman she had been before the revelations, and make her own path forward. "I don't know what's next," she said, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I don't know how to fix this, or if it's even possible. But I'm willing to try. I'm willing to rebuild. Maybe we can't ever go back to what we were, but maybe we can find something new. A new way forward." Daniel nodded, a look of relief washing over him. "I'm here for you, Sam. Whatever you need. Whatever it takes." Samantha didn't respond right away. She didn't have the answers. But the mere act of speaking those words out loud felt like the first step in moving on. She wasn't sure what healing would look like, or if it was even possible. But she knew that she couldn't let this one moment define her future. She couldn't let her father's choices, or Daniel's mistakes, steal her sense of self. The hardest part, Samantha realized, wasn't the truth that had come to light. It wasn't the betrayal she felt. It was accepting that sometimes, the people you love will hurt you, sometimes, they'll make choices you don't understand, and you'll never get the answers you need. But that didn't mean you had to let those choices define you. As she stood up to leave the cafe, she felt something inside her shift, a small, but significant change. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her hope. She didn't have to know all the answers right now. She didn't have to fix everything immediately. But she could start by taking it one step at a time. "I'll be okay," she said, more to herself than to Daniel. "I have to be." With that, she walked out of the cafe, her head held a little higher. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in days, Samantha felt a flicker of strength inside her. She wasn't sure where the journey would take her, but she knew that she was no longer willing to let the past control her future. She would find her way, on her own terms. And for now, that was enough.